Last night we met Florent. He walked into the Teisho just like this and announced that the green mountains are always walking. We rejoiced that it was a very short Teisho. Sometimes good to have a very short Teisho. But it wasn't quite that short. He actually added one more line. She had something more after he said the green mountains are always walking. And that was this. He added the phrase, a stone woman gives birth to a child at night. A stone woman gives birth to a child at night. And if this first line has a kind of bright, active, vital, yang quality to it, this second line has a dark, receptive, mysterious yin quality to it. And of course we're all familiar with the fact that in that great emblem of yin and yang, the bright is found inside the dark is found inside the bright. The two are a spinning wheel of complementarity. And that is happening here too. But of course it's always valuable to look at each of these lines and ask, what are they leaning into? What do they actually take the trouble to make clear? And that's what I want to have a look at tonight. What is it that Florent is pointing to with this, a stone woman is giving birth to a child at night? Well, it's such a powerful image that every time I hear it, I'm actually reminded of those astonishing objects that come from 21,000 years ago, up to 27,000 years ago. They're sometimes called the stone Venus. I don't know if you've seen some of these figurines. Incredible things. They're rotund, they're round, they're clearly feminine, and they're clearly old. Old. So old that even looking at them in a photograph, and I've never seen them face to face, perhaps some people here may have in a museum somewhere, but I'm immediately taken right back, not just through human time, through all of these ages, but into geological time. Almost time beyond time. Time going all the way back. And it's interesting that this geological time, of which we are a part, of course. This is what Florent was touching on last night. The fact that we are walking with these mountains. There is never any end or start to this walking. But there's something about these Venus figurines that's very, very interesting. And that is that, as I say, they're feminine figurines. And even though we have no idea what the ritual significance of these objects might have been, they are clearly fertility figures. Fertility figures. How curious that some of the earliest known objects, figurative objects, to come out of the earth, because these objects were unearthed, are fertility figures. What might this be pointing to? Well, of course, it talks to a great mystery of how birth even happens. Interesting that a stone, a cold-looking stone object, might be the emblem of fertility itself. But if you're perplexed by that, just have a look at this stone woman we call Mother Earth, floating in the great night of space. And how many children she seems to so effortlessly produce. Every moment, a child is born, not just human, not just wallaby, not just antechinus, not just fern, but children everywhere in every shape and form. She's a very busy mother. So how does this happen? How is it that she gives birth? How is it that a stone, this rock floating in space, manages to produce life? Well, happily, nobody knows. knows. Nobody knows. This is one of the great mysteries. Remember, the Buddha reminds us every single night that life and death is a great matter, beyond comprehension, beyond anybody's knowing. And yet here we are, resting in it. Whether we're aware or not, we are resting in this great fertility of the mystery. And that's, of course, what we allow ourselves to do with a kind of relish in Zazen. We let go into creation itself, into the mystery of simply appearing itself. How marvellous it is not to have to know and yet to be. To actually be this great expression of creativity itself. Now, in Zazen, as everybody here will have experienced, we allow ourselves to feel this by actually growing dark. Growing dark. Things dim a little bit when we sit in Zazen. The kind of fluorescence of the mind, which can be so blinding for so much of the time, just gets turned down a few dials, and then a few dials more, and a few dials more. And then we actually get to grow as dark as the night, as dark as the night itself. And the poet Lavinia Greenlaw actually compares this process to driving a car, of all things. She says, the brighter the interior of the car, the harder it is to see in the dark. So dashboards and screens dim themselves. You dim yourself too. Still and not still, you make tiny repetitive movements as you adjust the gears, the steering wheel, the pedals, the headlights, the radio, the air. You must remain alert and responsive, but in ways which seem as reflexive as scratching an itch. You flick your head from rear view to wing mirror and then to check the blind spot. You are continually shifting, and yet if the road is clear, and this is all it takes, and all goes smoothly, you feel as if you haven't moved at all. You might have been thinking, dreaming, listening to music or the radio, or talking to your passengers. You probably weren't thinking about driving at all. And this is what happens in sitting. All of these micro adjustments that allow us to dim. It's both active and not active. It's both responsive and yet we don't appear to be moving anywhere. We're very subtly moving with and being able to ride the dark, you might say. Right down this bendy, unforeseen road we call the Tao, we call the way. And this mysterious responsiveness of being able to just adjust ourselves into the dark, this is taken up in a beautiful case that many of you will be familiar with, but in this context it has its own resonance. And that is Yun Yan's hands and eyes. Let's walk through this case together. It's case 89 from the Blue Cliff record, and it goes like this. Yun Yan asked Dawu, how does the Bodhisattva Kanzeon use all those many hands and eyes? Dawu answered, it's like someone in the middle of the night reaching behind their head for a pillow. What a lovely response. Because this is Kanzeon, the Bodhisattva of compassion. We speak of Kanzeon, we chant Kanzeon, we celebrate Kanzeon, Kuan Yin, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion who is endlessly in service to the cries of the world. So this question is a beautiful one. How does she use those many hands and eyes. And this response, out of the dark itself, just it's like someone in the middle of the night reaching behind their head for a pillow. How natural, how unforced this is, how unintentional. There's no drive or push here. It's just spontaneously reaching behind the head in that sleepy, unconscious way and making life a little more comfortable. Just tucking that pillow up just so that we can again make that micro adjustment to be with the dark, to settle in even more deeply into this great dream we call life. Well, Yunyan and Daowu were great friends. They were often playing with the Dharma together, clarifying the Dharma for one another, enjoying it with one another. And that's very much what happens in this case, because Yunyan, having heard this interesting response, then turns around and says, I understand. And Daowu says, how do you understand it? Yunyan said, all over the body are hands and eyes. All over the body are hands and eyes. I wonder if you felt touched in this way in your Zazen, strangely cared for in your Zazen, protected in this place by the many hands and eyes that are the guardians of our sacred hall, as we like to say in our liturgy. All over the body are hands and eyes. It takes some darkening before we can realise this and truly sense it, truly feel it. Well, Daowu, having heard this, said, that's very well expressed, but it's only 8/10 of the answer. Nothing like a good friend to keep you on your toes. So Yunyan fires back. He says, well, then how would you say it, elder brother? He was only a little bit older, but good friends like to play in this way. How would you say it, elder brother? Daowu said, throughout the body are hands and eyes. Now, 8/10 of the matter is, of course, the whole. Just as this fingernail is the whole. It leaves nothing out. So throughout the body are hands and eyes. It's not some kind of one-upmanship, but it is beautiful. Because again, in deepest Zazen, it's not like the hands and eyes are just laying on top of us. They're reaching right through. They're moving right through. Our very strange micro-adjustment movement is the hands and eyes reaching back out into the world. Who can say self? Who can say world? In the dark, these two things dissolve completely. And of course, to feel the reach of these hands and eyes, to feel the way that they extend beyond this body, touching all the many beings, is the work of the Bodhisattva. We take up the Bodhisattva way in this practice. This is not self-help. This is actually being here for all the many beings. And the way this plays out is mysterious. Even when we don't think we're helping, sometimes it turns out we're helping. And I remember one time at the hospital where I work, I was given a referral to a man who had recently had a stroke. He was in his mid-60s, young. He had a stroke and was completely unable to talk. And the speech pathologists had been in, the nurses had been in, the doctors had been in, all sorts of allied health practitioners had been in to try and support this person, but he was so distressed that he kept trying to escape, he kept trying to reject any offer that was made to him. And so I was called in just to keen him. It's almost like last resort, get keen him. See if he can do something. So I entered, and there he was, looking very bent and rounded over. And it was true, he just could not speak. He could get a first letter or word out. Nothing more. 7, nothing more. So it was impossible to be in touch with him at a verbal level. Absolutely impossible. So we could only meet in the dark. And I just stayed with him, sat with him. We looked out the window, he gestured at a few things, and somehow it became clear that this might have been where he worked. Work, he'd say. He'd grimace sometimes. It's impossible not to mirror that, not intentionally, but when somebody winces, you wince with them. And staying around this very undecorated table and room, a few little birds started to come in and flit around some vines that were on this brick wall, and we just admired them together. There was nothing obvious that we could do. I just let go into being with him. What could I do? And I stayed with him for about 45 minutes. And we left smiling, actually, which was beautiful. And then I went on with my day to all the other referrals and people that I was to see. And yet about 2 or 3 days later, I was pulled aside by my line manager, and she asked, "Did you go and see so-and-so in the rehab ward the other day?" I said, yeah, we spent about 45 minutes together. And she said, "What happened in there?" I said, I don't know. We sat together, we looked at birds, we felt each other. He told me things without words. She said he was transformed by that experience. He was no longer trying to escape. He was eating all of his food. He was participating in the rehab. He was suddenly a renewed person. And this line manager of mine was so eager to learn what happened in there. And all I could say is, I don't know. And in this context, perhaps we could just say that throughout the body are hands and eyes. It has nothing to do with our knowing. Nothing to do with our knowing. Thank goodness. Because then we can actually touch. And this is true of any form of grief, I think, actually. Grief is part of human life. Part of human life. It's the other face of love, you might say. I don't even like calling it an other face of love. It is one face of love. When we lose somebody or something that we love, we grieve. And that can become a very dark place. It can be a very troubling place, a cold place, a stony place. And yet staying with this grief offers all sorts of, surprises. And I want to explore this actually with a very interesting poem by a poet that I'm not particularly familiar with. I've only read a few of her poems. Her name is Megan O'Rourke. But she's written a very interesting poem that doesn't talk about grief, but is grief somehow. And it's a poem that is offered as a series of questions. And we know what grief is like. Grief does often arrive as a series of profound and unexpected questions, but they're not questions that we actually expect an answer for. We don't even necessarily want an answer for these questions. And it's very interesting that in this poem, there's not a single question mark. All the question marks have been taken away. But the kind of scatological dark of grieving is expressed and given over in all of its randomness and all of its desperation. So here's the poem. It's called The Night Where You No Longer Live. She says, was it like lifting a veil? And was the grass treacherous, the green grass? Did you think of your own mother? Was it like a virus? Did the software flicker? And was this the beginning? Was it like that? Was there gas station food? And was it a long trip? And is there sun there? Or drones? Or punishment? Or growth? Was it a blackout? And did you still create me? And what was I like on the first day of my life? Were we two from the start? And was our time an entrance or an ending? Did we stand in the heated room? Did we look at the painting? Did the snow appear cold? Were our feet red with it, with the wet snow? And then what were our names? Did you love me or did I misunderstand? Is it terrible? Do you intend to come back? Do you hear the world's keening? Will you stay the night? I think this last line, will you stay the night, is the very heart of grieving, actually, and the very heart of working with grief. Because it's not only a longing to curl up with that lost one, that loved one, to stay the night with that lost one, to feel them close. But there's a question here, can we stay the night? Can we see it through? Can we stay with the darkness of this night? Can we allow the darkness of this night to actually open up as the compassion that is inside it, or let the compassion that's inside it open up, you might say. And this can arrive in very unexpected forms, sometimes staying with grief over many, many, many years can open up in a profound and complete and loving farewell. A letting go. A letting go that is actually a letting in and a letting through. This kind of miracle that can happen is the miracle that's afforded by letting this night teach you what is needed, teach you what wants to come forth, what is needing to arrive. And that takes the capacity to agree with this dark, to agree with our own grief. And it's funny how these moments of grace can be born out of this dark. It's not lost on me that actually most children are born at night, literally born at night. I think the official time is 4 a.m., the most likely time for a child to be born. So that's interesting too. There's something natural about things appearing at night time, arriving completely at night time. Again, it's unforced. It's just apparently the way things are. So, this leads me to explore the dark just in another case that's very interesting and takes up the surprise of the dark and how the dark can actually enlighten our practice. And this comes from the Wu Ming poem. It is case number, I'll get to my tag, case number 28, and it's called Lung Tan, Renowned Far and Wide. It says, Teisho visited Lungtan and questioned him sincerely far into the night. It grew late and Lungtan said, "Why don't you retire?" Teisho made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but was met by darkness. Turning back, he said, "It's dark outside." Lungtan lit a paper candle and handed it to Teisho. Teisho was about to take it when Lungtan blew it out. Teisho had sudden realization and made bows. Lungtan said, "What truth did you discern?" Teisho said, "From now on I will not doubt the words of an old priest who was renowned everywhere under the sun." And these are moving words from a man who actually arrived at Daishan's temple, not to learn, but to demolish. Daishan was a scholar of the Diamond Sutra, and he'd heard about this rogue activity called Zen, and he thought, about time I put an end to that. So he made a long journey to meet Lungtan, and there's lovely stories about the journey and how he finally arrived at Lungtan's room. But it's interesting, even though he came to extinguish the Dharma, he found himself asking questions far into the night. And I love that he asked these questions far into the night, so far into the night perhaps that some of the question marks began to fall away. Perhaps the spirit of questioning was very much alive in him, but the needing of an answer perhaps began to fall away. Not needing a solution anymore, not needing to be the authority anymore, but learning to rest in it, learning to relax in it. And it's beautiful that Lungtan actually, because this has been going on for quite some time, finally says, "Why don't you retire?" It's getting late, pal. I'm an old man. It would be good to lie down and get some sleep. But there's a sense here too of, why don't you retire this work of yours? Why don't you retire this project? Why don't you retire this endless activity that you seem so obsessed with? Let it go, let it go. When Teisho moves to retire, he opens the door and he's almost astonished by this blackness, by this darkness. He's lost entire track of time and he's met by utter darkness. And all he can say is, it's dark outside. Dark outside perhaps, but equally dark inside. What an unique experience that is, to be so engulfed in darkness. And there's a lovely anecdote actually that Lavinia Greenlaw, that same poet who taught us about driving the car, tells about her time caving in Slovenia. She says she was shown this cave and she thought, oh, how wonderful, I'll start walking down this cave. And she walked in, and of course caves get darker the further you walk in. And it got darker and it got darker and it got darker. And it got so dark that she could only see the flashlight up ahead of a tour group. It was supposed to be a tour guide with a torch. And she thought, I'm catching up with them. So she ran ahead to join that tour group. And the tour guide led them into this great cathedral right in the heart of the womb of the mountain. And then he turned off his torch. This is what Lavinia says. The guide turned off the lights. The darkness was so substantial that I felt as if I could lean into it. It was more than air and less than solid texture or pressure, a form of touch. I felt it on my skin rather than my eyes, and its effect was to make me give up my body. I wasn't anxious anymore, but somehow released. This is surrendering to utter darkness. This is Teisho's darkness. The darkness where body and mind could fall away. Body and mind gone, completely gone to the other shore. Bodhisvaha. So this beautiful release that's offered by the dark, well, it's important to recognise that Buddhism itself was released from the dark. We talk about the dark enigma. There are all sorts of names for this mysterious source from which this entire practice seems to come. And it's not lost on me that the Buddha himself was said to have been born from his mother's side. Interesting detail. He was born from the side as if to say, naturally, surprisingly, from around the corner, perhaps. A little bit like that arm reaching round in the middle of the night to fluff up that pillow. The Buddha arrived in exactly the same way. Surprising, unexpected. And then precociously, the Buddha then decided to point one hand up, one hand down, take 7 steps in a large circle. You've seen children do this. And then turn and say, above the heavens, below the heavens, I am alone and the only one. The triple world is full of suffering. It is I who will relieve it. Now this I is perhaps the darkest word in Buddhism. Look into how dark this I is. It is the dark of mu. It is the dark of emptiness. It's the dark of no self. It's the dark of no suffering. It's the dark of unborn, undying. It's the dark of our practice. Which is why I think Joan Sutherland Roshi is probably correct when she says we shouldn't be talking about enlightenment. We should be talking about endarkenment. Mm-hmm. So we are here to practice this endarkenment. And we're here to practice it because if we can learn to harmonise with the dark, we can learn to respond from the dark. And responding from the dark is to respond as Avalokiteshvara, as Kanzeon, because it's not about someone called I. It's about the dark of no self responding to these cries of the world. So thank you for your darkening.